Mr. Bieber, first of all, thank you for your time today. How do you evaluate the first mega summit of the European political community in Prague and all the messages and meetings? True unity or just a polite pomp with a goal, a message to Moscow?
Well, I think it's hard to tell yet how successful that summit was. I mean, the fact that Macron had his way and it took place at all is a big success for Macron. The fact that all the leaders came, including Britain, which I think was very important to make the project viable, was also a success. So all of the governments and heads of state were there. Of course, there was no final decision, so it's more of an open-ended process. But the fact that it happened, the fact that everybody participated, the fact that there was this space for bilateral and multilateral talks certainly suggests that this was a successful summit. I don't think it's going to change the future of Europe or European unity against Russia, but it certainly was a potent symbol.
There were also nervous messages between Serbia and Croatia, also between Turkey and Greece. How do you see this?
Well, these are, of course, tensions which have been around well before the summit. The summit, of course, bilateral meetings between governments, heads of government, provide for an opportunity to calm some conflicts, like the ones you've mentioned. Of course, a summit itself or the meetings around it cannot resolve them. This would be expecting too much of any diplomatic event of that sort. It can just provide a framework where two presidents, two prime ministers can meet who otherwise might not be eager to meet. I mean, people have said this for years, that this is the big advantage of the UN General Assembly session in September, which we just had a few weeks ago. It's a place not about the speeches that people hold at the podium, but about the meetings you hold afterwards to try to talk to people you don't get a chance to talk to. And I think whether or not this was successful, we don't know, but certainly it was a chance for leaders to try to resolve some of the disputes they have.
Well, my next question is, how will in future 44 countries, because 44 countries we had yesterday, will manage to harmonize in the future when we have the same problem who exists in the European Union itself and which has only 27 members? How will in future 44 countries will harmonize?
I don't think this is realistic. I don't even know if this is the ambition of the European political community. I mean, what it can do is it can allow leaders to synchronize or at least communicate messages, avoid misunderstandings. I don't think we're going to see new European unity as a result of this. But what we can see is just an opportunity for coordination. Now, I think what is missing in this initiative is something which follows up. And the European political community has no structures, no institutions. So it lacks the ability to deal with some of the issues. And that will be, at the end of the day, probably with the European Union to follow up on some of the sentiments, ideas voiced during the discussions. It's a bit of a pity. I always thought that it would have been more useful if the European political community would be linked to the Council of Europe, which is basically the same membership. Exactly the same countries are in it, more or less. And so it could do that job. It has a secretariat, it has institutions, so it could do a lot more to make the ideas expressed at the summit reality.
How will this affect to enlargement? Will it slow down or no? And is this maybe Europe in stages?
Well, if it's a stage, it's a very small stage of stages, because I mean, you have to consider the European political community includes Azerbaijan and Armenia and Georgia. I mean, Azerbaijan is a dictatorship. I mean, there's no other words for it. So it's hardly a club of democracies. It's hardly a club who can imagine to join the European Union. I mean, you know, those countries are much further away than North Macedonia or the countries of the Western Balkans. So I think certainly Macron had in mind when he launched the idea that this could be something which could satisfy maybe at least the desire for enlargement. I think if I was a government in the Western Balkans, I would say, okay, EPC is fine, but it doesn't address any of the needs we have. It doesn't provide for more security. It doesn't provide for economic growth. It doesn't provide for rule of law and better democracy. So it's useful, but it has in no way anything to offer which the countries of the Western Balkans aspire to, and in fact already have. They are further along the integration path than what the European political community can offer.
How can North Macedonia use this in future, use the European political community?
Well, I think countries like North Macedonia can use this as a way to address bilateral discussions, issues with the European Union and its member states, which are not addressed in the negotiation framework. Especially, this is a space to find new friends and talk to old friends, to address, we all know that there are some unresolved questions with regard to Bulgaria, for example. So there are ways to kind of try to build alliances, build friendships, and find a way to talk about issues they can't talk about in the classical, let's say, EU format so far. So also, for example, to reach out to Great Britain. So I think there are opportunities which countries like North Macedonia could use and should seize.